But with that, it's probably time to get started. So welcome everybody to the SECAS Third Thursday Web Forum for September. We've been hosting this web forum on the third Thursday of every month for going on a decade now, probably. It's intended as a chance to share exciting science on landscape conservation and climate change in our region, share updates on the blueprint, and just give an opportunity for folks like y'all to engage and ask questions and give us feedback. So here is our agenda for today. As always, I start out by introducing our speaker, then we'll hear for 30 to 40 minutes or so on our monthly topic. We'll wrap up at the end with plenty of time, hopefully, for Q&A and discussion, and then I'll share a preview of next month's webinar so you know what to expect, and wrap up with some staff updates. So as a heads up, you probably saw we are recording this web forum, which I do just as an option for the one or two people who inevitably reach out saying they had a conflict and want to see the recording. I'll link the slides and video from the calendar events on the SECAS website and the South Atlantic website within a couple of days. So any questions or comments before I hand things over to Yvonne? All right, so our speaker today is Yvonne Allen. She's a spatial ecologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and one of the amazing GIS support staff who helped develop the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. So she's going to be talking about a project to assess floodplain inundation frequency and other dynamic aspects of flood inundation at a landscape scale using Landsat imagery. So Yvonne, take it away.
All right, so this is thank you, Hillary, for the introduction, for inviting me here today. This is a talk that maybe some of you all have seen before. I've been working on this kind of background, working in forested wetlands and using remote sensing to identify aspects of floodplain forests for a long time. And I always try to add some little extra new tidbits onto the end of it. So this is an outline of what I'll be covering today. I'll give you some motivation why we did this, creating the inundation frequency data set, and then I'll give you a little bit of under the hood, how the process for creating the inundation frequency and why we chose some of the temporal considerations. I'll go through a comparison with other similar data sets. There's the Joint Research Consortium Global Water Data Set, National Wetlands Inventory, and FEMA floodplains. And then I'll show you some example applications of what this can be used for. It's not exhaustive. There are lots of other things. And then I'll demo the most recent thing, which is a Google Earth Engine app, so that you can sort of do the same kind of thing on your own desktop. So the motivation is we're working in the Southeast, and large river floodplains large rivers in general are a dominant feature of the landscape, and large river floodplains are an important feature of the large river ecosystem. So this is a map of US rivers that have more than 10,000 CFS for their mean annual flow. So you can see it's really concentrated in the Southeast. And then if you look at the areas where that intersects with forested wetlands, you can see that's also a dominant feature in the Southeast. So you're trying to look for places where water is getting, but the trees give it a special little twist of where you can see actually where the water is and where you're not able to see that. So just a little why floodplains are great. I'm sure that most people on this call already know that, but they provide habitat for aquatic species, but also for terrestrial species. They're important in nutrient recycling, nutrient cycling, and floodplain risk reduction. So the extent and frequency of inundation really drive the delivery of these ecosystem services. So you can see on the right here, this is part of the Mississippi River, and this is these are the dynamics that are typical within a year. As the river rises, it floods into these areas, some of which are forested, some of which are ag. So the raw materials that I use to create this is Landsat imagery and there's a large library of Landsat imagery from the early 80s to the present. I used cloud and snow-free imagery so you can compare apples to apples within the same Landsat scene. And I was interested in classifying both open water and flooded vegetation, and that the open water classification is quite typical for a lot of applications, but looking at flooded vegetation requires a slightly different algorithm, and that's usually a different feature of this application. And then because we're focusing on those floodplain, forested floodplain areas, we're looking at imagery that's acquired during leaf off. So in the southeast, that's December through March and extends into April for some of the more northerly locations. During this time, you can capture a variety of hydrologic conditions in the southeast, which is great during this December through March time period. And also during this, because it's leaf off, it reduces the obscuring from vegetation, whether it's canopy vegetation, ground vegetation, or some floating aquatic vegetation. So just digging into that temporal aspect a little bit more, this is a publication from 2019 showing the season of annual peak flow. And you can see in the southeast, that's that January, February, March time period is really important. So that coincides with leaf off, which is also good. So this is the distribution. This is also supporting that temporal consideration. This is the timing of leaf on. This is what they call mid green up. So this is into the canopy cover. So you can see March, April, May. So in the southeast, we're really looking at that the temporal window up to about March and sometimes into April. And this is just the area of coverage that we're going to be considering from here forward. So this is the SECAS boundary and inundation frequency as a composite. I've generated that for this entire geography. Excuse me. So a little bit about the details of how this is created. We always start with one Landsat scene, which is like a cookie cutter out of that entire geography, and classify that scene into wet and dry categories, and then sum that over many different Landsat images and many different hydrologic conditions. So you end up with something like this. So this is a composite of 24 images, and it shows the areas in black that are more frequently inundated and shades of blue to less frequently inundated. So that's just one Landsat scene over the entire geography that we're looking at. This was about 150 Landsat scenes. Each of them have a stack of images. So it's to create this entire composite, it's roughly 3,000 images, more or less, depending on when you stop the ending time period. So, and that's what it looks like across the southeast. You can see the Mississippi alluvial valley. It's very low relief area, tends to get a lot of impounded water because of that low relief, and some of the floodplain forests in the White River and in the Mississippi and a couple other locations. So, and this is the Mobile River here. So this is just kind of zooming in on one individual location. You can, if you're looking at an individual location and you're interested in tying that, the extent of inundation to local gauging, you can do that as well. And this is just a demonstration. Excuse me. So this is the difference from that large scale, which is a kind of more of a cartographic project, which shows the relative inundation frequency, to this one more localized. You can tie it to local gauging, and that's not difficult. So if you look on the right here, this is Apalachicola, very dry to, as you're increasing in discharge, you can see the extent of inundation in this area is increasing like this. So This project was focused on identifying areas that may be monitored for changes in flooding due to changes in the Army Corps of Engineers Water Control Manual. So that's just an idea of how that works. So on to kind of a comparison with other data sets. The JRC Global Water Database is a really great project that came available over the last few years, and it uses the same source. It's a slightly different process, so you end up with slightly different results between inundation frequency and that data set. So you can see this is a section of the lower Mississippi River. This is at St. Catherine Creek, and these arrows here highlight the main difference, and these are forested areas. So the JRC Global Water Database is really focused on that open water area, and it doesn't do as good a job as Inundation Index in capturing sort of that water beneath the floodplain. And that's for two reasons. The algorithm that they use is focused more on open water, and in this in inundation frequency, it's also limited to that seasonal window. So you're seeing that leaf off conditions, and you can see the water beneath the trees. So this is a comparison with National Wetlands Inventory. National Wetlands Inventory in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley really hasn't been updated in quite a while, and it's a very restricted sort of process. So it's very long and time consuming. So this kind of can form like a bridge between the very detailed information that's available in NWI and getting something that's more recent. So this is inundation frequency over this area. And then this is NWI. You can see there are a lot of kind of artificial boundaries here. Some of these are dealing with ag land, but they do actually get wet. So they're not being captured. And this part of this is due to variability in NWI, and part of it is due to the currency of the data. That's the temporal currency that's available. So this is an area to compare with FEMA, the FEMA firms data set, and NWI and inundation frequency in southeast Wisconsin. This is an area around Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, for people who are familiar with that. This is the FEMA firms map, and then you can see this is a different shading. It's in red instead of blue. But this is the inundation index over this area. So it roughly corresponds to the same locations, gives slightly different results. And then if you put NWI over the top, you can see, again, it's showing, it's highlighting, it's similar, but it's a little bit different for different reasons. So like this area that gets wet down here is not being captured by NWI, and that may be a more recent development on the landscape. So that's kind of the comparison. So that's the methodology, and then the comparison with different existing data sets. So I'll go briefly into 4 kind of example applications. So this is South Louisiana. This is the Atchafalaya Basin here, and New Orleans is here. And this is the extent of the EPA floodplain in this area. So it's showing areas, this is the 100-year floodplain, so it's kind of a rare event. Inundation frequency generally is looking at flooding that occurs more typical seasonally. So it's looking at that 1 to 2 year flooding occurrence rather than something like this, a 100-year event, which is a fairly extreme event. So this is the EPA floodplain, and then if you put inundation frequency on top of it, you can see you have a much richer sort of data set. So there are areas here that are like east of Baton Rouge that are in the floodplain, but they're not getting wet very frequently. So it's a floodplain, but it's not functioning in the same way as like the swamps around Lake Maurepas or in the Atchafalaya Basin, or some of these coastal areas, or even some of these ag areas that are, this is also capturing ag areas to the east. So it's anything really that has water on top of it. So the next example is also using that 100-year floodplain, but it's sort of summarizing it. So I use the gray to mask out areas that don't have significant amounts of floodplain. So the blues and reds are areas that have significant amounts of floodplain, but the red areas are showing those floodplain areas that are typically dry. So this is in the Florida parishes, just east of Baton Rouge, east of Apalachicola, and around the Big Bend area of Florida, and Okefenokee. Some of these areas, like in Apalachicola, and I think in Okefenokee, a lot of these areas have been drained and ditched. So they're not getting, although they're in the floodplain, they're not getting the same amount of inundation as some of the areas that are in the MAV or in Southeast Louisiana. And that's just to say that these areas may be opportunities for floodplain reconnection if that's something that is of interest or to partners and folks that are working in conservation in those areas. So that's reconnection opportunities. I've also used it as a building block. So this is that, again, that unique building block. It's not that inundation frequency is necessarily a standalone product, but it adds value to other projects. So I use that together with an estimate of thermal distribution, also from Landsat, and with the National Land Cover Database to identify vegetation. All these three factors are very important in identifying important areas for alligator gar spawning on the floodplain. So that's how it could be used in habitat suitability for floodplain dependent or alternatively for floodplain sensitive species like ground nesting birds or denning black bears or something like that. You could do the same sort of exercise. So another project that this has been used on that is actually pretty important. In these large river floodplains, you're often seeing from an aerial view, or these forested wetland areas, from an aerial view, you're just seeing the top of the trees for most of the year. So it can be hard to do some kind of planning because people don't see this sort of the rapid dynamics that are present in these large river floodplains. And this happened in the Atchafalaya Basin. There was a LiDAR acquisition, and that's what these blue kind of stripy polygons are here. Sorry, it's blue on blue. But LiDAR was acquired over these areas, and unfortunately it was acquired, it was in 2019, and it was acquired in March. So that was a big flag to me when I discovered that. So the areas in blue from inundation frequency that are under these striped areas, all of that was wet, and I could look at the gauge heights and show, compare that to inundation frequency and show that this entire area was flooded during LiDAR acquisition. So a large portion of it of that data set, unfortunately, had to be rejected by USGS. So, and areas like this, where you see something like this can look like a green grass lawn, but it's not a green grass lawn during those winter months. So it can be. So when LiDAR is flown in these areas, it will show, if a LiDAR was flown in this picture, for example, it would show a bare earth elevation right here where this pondweed is. And of course, that's not a bare earth elevation. So products like the inundation frequency can help to inform both a retrospective analysis of what happened during LiDAR acquisition, as well as planning for future acquisitions. So what are the times of months when it's below, when the river levels are low enough that you can actually get a bare earth elevation? All right, so the last thing that I wanted to do here was a demo of this Google Earth Engine app. When I started this process many years ago, probably more than 10 years ago, I was downloading each individual image to my desktop. And even before that, we had to pay for the imagery, but it's evolved every year, which is great. To now I work in Google Earth Engine, which is all the imagery is available on the cloud, and I can just interact with the imagery using a browser. So I have been doing that for the past couple of years, which is great. It reduces my the amount of data management that I have to do to just, managing the script that I use to deploy this analysis. But the other benefit is that I can put the power of this sort of analysis into the hands of the people. So power to the people, right? Okay, so I will, that one, hopefully, if this will play nice with me. So I put all of the links I've put in my presentation, and that will be available to y'all. So when you go to this link, this is open and available to the public. It'll bring you to a screen that looks like this. And you can see this, the instructions here on the right. So you navigate to your area of interest. So say I want to look at this area, that's Little Lake, that's in coastal Louisiana. No, this is an area that's changed recently. So I'll draw an AOI. So I just draw a square right here. And you can see that, so the thing is wait for inundation frequency layers to draw. So you can see up here, something's happening with these layers as well. So my AOI is still on here. I don't really want to see my AOI, so I can clear that off. In the background, it's showing, the background color shows the number of images used. So green is good, that's greater than 20 images, which is kind of a cutoff that I use for, I feel like those results are more reliable as you're getting like here further to the east, that's in yellow, and it can get to red. This inundation frequency is using fewer images, so it's not as reliable, but in this area it's good. I can also go up here to this menu and turn off that number of images so I can see what's in the background. Can turn on the satellite imagery that's back here. And I can also toggle on and off the inundation frequency so I can see what that looks like over that time period. So I chose this area because I know that a lot of this area has been affected recently by hurricanes. So what I can do, I can adjust these temporal settings that are here. So I'd still want to look at that December through March time frame, but I want to go look at 2017 through 2021. And let me clear the inundation frequency layers that I have. And let's just look at this area again. So it's just restricting that time period here. I'm still getting a good number of images, so that's great. I'll take that off. And there my AOI. So this is what that looks like. You may recall this area looked a little bit different. So I can run this again using 2021 to current, well, it's 2030, but and draw an AOI over the same area. And you can see it's just adding that information on top, which is great. So I can kind of compare those data. Take that off. And clear the AOI again. And this is using fewer images, but you can see what the difference is. So there is a lot more open water area in this 2020 since 2021. So Hurricane Ida came through here, right up Barataria Bay, and cleared out a tremendous amount of what they call flottant marsh, which is just a skim of marsh over top of water. So you can see that area that was heavily affected by Hurricane Ida. So that's just one sort of application. You can also change the months if you're looking at someplace that's further afield, and I can do that as well. So I can do this not just within the southeast, but we can do this sort of in some of these areas up here. This is prairie pothole area. So change these monthly settings to maybe April through June or something like that. Draw an AOI. And you see there are fewer images that represent this this time window. So this is, you know, sort of your warning sign. Take this with a grain of salt. There are a few images that are here. So I can click this and turn off this, maybe turn on the satellite, and then look at locations. Most of this area, so this tool is, like I said at the beginning, it's really well tailored for these very dynamic areas of forested wetland where seasonally the water levels are going up and down. So this area is a little bit more static. You have a lot more of this water that's represented in black, which is 100% water is always observed in these locations. There are a few areas around the edges where it's a little bit less frequent, and that's probably indicating aquatic vegetation grow out from the edges. So with that, I will get rid of this and go back to my presentation here. So just kind of wrapping up, there are lots of publications where I present this information, going all the way back to 2008 when we were starting this sort of process in the Atchafalaya Basin, which is, by the way, probably the most difficult area to map with respect to forested wetlands. So it's a kind of a neat area to cut my teeth on. Also looking at the Wax Lake Delta. So this is an area in coastal Louisiana that's where the land is building, but it's also subject to tidal variation and river variation. So we were trying to extract what is the actual land building rate that's occurring in this section of coastal Louisiana. And how do we tease that land change apart from variations that are either tidally or riverine driven. And then basic methodology papers, and then it gets into some applications where it's been used for identifying areas of conservation for protection of fish and wildlife. And this is the alligator gar HSI paper. So all these references are available if you want to look at it, and I would be happy to entertain any questions at this point.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. We have plenty of time for questions, so feel free to jump in. You can pop yourself off of mute or drop questions in the chat and I'll share them. Lots of applause hands.
I want to jump in. This is amazing. This is so much data. Thank you so much for giving us this presentation. Like, I hadn't really looked at stuff like this for about 15 years, and the level of data that you have and the way that you've organized it and how easy it is to work with is completely different. So this is really cool. One thing that I remember from a long time ago is we had a hard time getting satellite imagery during major flood events because of the cloud cover and just the limited time steps for Landsat. I was curious, how has that changed over time?
It's changed. The time step has changed dramatically. The interface that I just showed you is actually using Sentinel-2 data, which is the main product that I've relied upon just because I have that historical data set is Landsat. But the Sentinel-2 data has greatly increased the revisit frequency. So that's why I'm able to use these really restricted time periods now, because we have Sentinel-A, Sentinel-B, Landsat 8, and now Landsat 9. I mean, this is a lot more imagery that's being acquired. So that's one thing that's helping. The other thing is sort of in the nature of the product that these data, like I said at the beginning, are interested in looking at typical seasonal flooding. So we're not interested in those major flood events. So we're looking for those opportunities where we have a clear day and high water, which in the large rivers is not unexpected. That it happens fairly frequently. I'll usually get like 2 or 3 images out of a stack of 20 that represent some of those higher level events. They're not necessarily in that 100-year or 500-year floodplain, which is what those are kind of the thresholds that are usually tackled by the hydraulic models.
Okay, that's really helpful.
So this is really looking at habitat, so typical seasonal flooding.
Awesome.
Right. And the satellites have been just a bonus. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, the amount of data you were talking about is blowing my mind.
It's fun, and it's just a little tiny little script that you run in your browser.
Amazing.
Louise, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to jump in with a question?
I did, and I hope this is a decent question, but I'm wondering if, because you have these time series and you can kind of look at inundation under time, one thing I guess I've been thinking about recently is I've seen a lot of proposals for restoration work about connecting rivers back to their floodplains. And I was wondering if with this data, you can kind of see like post-restoration work. Can you see the impacts of rivers being cut off from their floodplains through this inundation? And also inversely, can you monitor restoration efforts and show like a measurement of that?
What do you think I'm doing here?
I think you're doing it.
I think she's going to show us right now in real time.
Yeah, there's an area that TNC has been really involved with floodplain reconnections of all sorts. And this is an area that's called Mollisey Farms. So I can draw, this is just showing, so like I said, this is the Sentinel-2 imagery. This, and I'm getting ready to revamp my code so I can include Landsat imagery in this as well. So this is called the Mollisey Farms area, 4 to 6. This is not working for this part of the country. Let me clear this off. And this area was purchased by TNC, and they've done a lot of great work to work with the landowner and restore this area. It was put in farming, or it was heavily farmed at least in the 60s. And clear this AOI and clear these number of images off here. So this whole area behind the levees here used to be dry all the time. And currently, so this is 2017 to the present, you can see now it's getting regularly inundated. And that, excuse me again, that inundation is mimicking what is in the surrounding landscape. So this is a restoration success, really. Success story, and it's due to the hard work of people at TNC to actually get this done. So this whole area used to be dry all the time. There are 30-foot levees that are surrounding it. So this is providing not only habitat for fish and wildlife, but it's also, you can kind of imagine, this is giving the river a lot more room to spread out. So it's decreasing the floodplain, the inundation risk downstream, which is also another kind of social benefit to that project. So yes.
That's very cool to be able to show this.
And there are more if you're interested. There's another one on the Mississippi River that I just forgot about.
Ruit, do you have a question? I see your hands up.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily even a question, more of a follow-up to what Louise had said. You know, this strikes me, one of the nice things in thinking about, you know, when you're proposing some of these floodplain restoration projects, thinking about all the folks we help with on floodplain restoration stuff, like this could be a really metrics, especially with like National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, a bunch of those other groups, they're sort of all about metrics and monitoring. And it strikes me that being able to sort of show that you'll be able to quickly report on your study area with remote sensing data, you know, over the next, you know, few years after the restoration, that could be a nice little competitive edge. And it's because of the tool that Yvonne is showing, it's something that you could, you know, zoom into your specific study area, kind of like folks with, you know, when you're doing prescribed fire, you go back and check out the results in the imagery. I think you could do the same thing with hydrologic restoration stuff. And that could be a really nice thing to add in proposals that wouldn't actually cost a whole bunch of extra dollars in monitoring and efforts.
Yeah, great point. Doug, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry I was late to the party. Great job, Yvonne. Have you thought about, for the social benefit aspect, have you thought about taking the inundations and matching them up with the best DEM that you can get to try to calculate the acre feet of storage, flood storage that's in the floodplain now, and saying that this is providing this much flood storage over what was before, to reduce the emergency needs downstream, which could be considered a climate adaptation in the times of heavier downpours.
Thank you. Yes, I think I did. And that's pretty neat. I like it. I guess if you could predict, like for an area like this, when it was dry, if you could predict what the extent, well, this is fairly well bounded. So in an instance like this, that would probably be a pretty easy little feature to add on to this application. For something that's well bounded. If you did some sort of hydrologic restoration that wasn't well bounded, then you would have to know where you think the water, you know, to what extent the water is going to go there. But yeah, that's a great idea. I think I'll look into adding that onto the application.
Great. Are you thinking that NISAR might help you with some of this as well?
Yes. Yes, I can't wait. So NISAR is a radar right now. There are a few handful, I guess, of satellites that are collecting radar data, which would help with the question that Amy was talking about. So being able to see through the clouds, but the wavelengths that they operate on are not conducive to forested wetlands like this that really get a variable amount of inundation. So you have that diversity of vegetation that makes analysis really tough. And the NISAR satellite is an L-band satellite that hopefully will make that process a little bit more straightforward. So yeah, opportunities for expanding this into the future to be able to see some of those rarer flooding events that bridge into the and may serve as a tie with some of the hydraulic models that are looking at those 100-year and 500-year events.
Do I see your hand?
Yeah, I was thinking of another application beyond just the hydrologic restoration of that same, like, that storage estimate that Doug was talking about. You know, a big thing I know, like with the Upper Waccamaw watershed, Upper Waccamaw Task Force and a bunch of other coastal communities have been trying to sort of make that case for, you know, preserving wetlands and the hydrology of those wetlands as a kind of flood impact strategy. And I could totally see how just, hey, within this county, within some of these places, you know, if we had some estimates of like, yes, actually this area you're looking at is storing this much water typically, that could be another compelling sort of ecosystem service folks for those communities. Because right now it's basically, I know that a lot of the folks, land trusts, county, federal, state folks have sort of struggled with going beyond just, you know, these wetlands are storing water for you. And like how much, I think could actually be a really impactful thing for, I think, a lot of communities that are looking at wetland conservation as one of the tools for dealing with flooding. So that could be a cool application just for a specific region too.
That actually, I'm sorry, Yvonne, go ahead.
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, that actually can be kind of turned on its ear a little bit with partnering with USGS to say, okay, here's the landscape of this basin. If these wetlands are removed, then this many acre feet of water have to flow through the stream downstream, which will raise the flow, the height of the flood by X amount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I was thinking about in that. Now it's a little tricky because of all the hydrologic alteration to get to the flow and the stream side of things. But yeah, those are the kind of things that I was thinking about. Like, look, these wetlands are holding this much water for you. And when there's a proposal to sort of develop or alter the hydrology to be able to say like, all right, well, just know that you're losing this service and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it.
That's kind of similar to the slide that I demonstrated here that's looking at, you know, these are the current conditions for Apalachicola, and this is the extent of inundation with different discharges. So we can look at this, and then if there are changes in that, well, as we move forward, as they change the water control manual, are there differences in the extent and frequency of flooding within this area?
Amy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I had a question. Ducks Unlimited many years ago had a project that's similar to what you're showing here, where they were trying to relate the extent of flooding with the river gauges. And they used that to help predict current potential net frill vegetation in the MAV, because the flood regime had changed so much from historic conditions. Trying to figure out what to plant now was pretty confusing. So is this something that you're thinking about doing? It would be a lot of work because you have to get across the whole Southeast, it would be a huge amount of work. I don't know if that would be something you could undertake. Is that something that's you're thinking about, or?
I think so, and correct me if this is not what you were thinking about, but for TNC, actually early on in the Atchafalaya Basin, they wanted to identify some areas that were going to be stable into the future to do restoration on. And in the Atchafalaya, toward the lower part of the basin, it has right around in here, there's some beautiful cypress forests, but this area of the basin stays consistently wet. So they use this to, it's a little bit backwards from, you know, the restoration that you were talking about, but they wanted to identify areas that into the future are not going to be affected by sea level rise, and where they could actually do some planting and do some restoration and it wouldn't go away. Also on the lower Mississippi River, the Army Corps of Engineers has a region that's targeted for restoration between the Hatchie and the Loossahatchee rivers, and they're using inundation frequency to identify areas that are currently, not just the soils, sort of a static representation, but they're looking at areas for river cane restoration. And that would also provide habitat for some of the alligator gar and some of the open vegetation sort of species. So they're looking at this and saying, well, soils might be appropriate here, but right now the frequency of inundation is too much. Where are the areas that are going to sort of stay high and dry or sort of stay in that window of inundation where the river cane can actually maybe make it. Same with cypress. I mean, cypress need, a certain amount, a certain number of growing days that are where they are dry. So that's the sort of analysis that we went through with TNC.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about, because it was like, you're used to looking at soils because the soils are formed under these historic conditions, but now those historic conditions don't exist. So you need this type of stuff. This made me think of another question. So back, 15 years ago, they were very worried about comparing watershed to watershed. And I think it might have been mostly because of the limitation in the data. You don't have enough representation in the data. So you could go like, oh, I've captured this area really well with a wide variety of flood events, and I've not captured the other area very well. And so it was a concern of comparing across. Do we have enough data now that that's less of a concern?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that was done basically with, I think, 9 images in a certain location. And that's sort of what I started with in 2008 in the Atchafalaya Basin, was just because we didn't have the long-term library of imagery, and we also didn't have the advantage of Sentinel-A and Sentinel-B, so we have this increased frequency of observations. So that's been, it's not for lack of ingenuity on their part, they just didn't have the raw materials available. So
yeah, that's so cool. This is so exciting, Yvonne. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That kind of makes me think of a question, and this is way out of my depth technically, but like, how good is our understanding of the historic flood regime, like prior to human alteration? Like, do we have the data to be able to turn this into something like how natural is the flow regime and the floodplain flooding pattern compared to what it would naturally have been? Because I can almost think of like a cool indicator for the blueprint kind of getting at degree of floodplain alteration of natural flow regime or something that could identify like really great intact high quality areas, but also restoration opportunities.
And that's kind of what I tried to get at with this comparison of what is the historical floodplain, or what is and as a surrogate for the historical floodplain, I use the EPA floodplain that's based on elevation, because that's based on a kind of a longer term evaluation of where water has a chance to go, and it compares fairly well. So this kind of comparison will get at that, and also for the MAV in particular, there's of course a lot of historical mapping of flood events, and I have some historical maps that have georeferenced, so I can tell, what is the percent of floodplain that's available to the lower Mississippi River now compared to what it used to be. And it is, the numbers jive with historical estimates, which is 10% of the original floodplain is what we have available now within the Batcher compared to previous.
Okay, that makes sense. I wasn't thinking of elevation as that like proxy for historic condition. That makes total sense. Very cool. Any other questions? We could probably take one more before we close things out, and then I'm just going to wrap up with next month's webinar and a quick update from SECAS staff.
Great, because I'm out of water and I can't talk.
Yeah, it's a lot of talking and a lot of questions. Well, thanks again, Yvonne. So yeah, here's what to expect next month. I'm really excited about this talk as well. We're going to be hearing from Richter Bro and Kyle Buck with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The date will be October 20th, same time, same connection information as today. And they're going to be talking about carbon and stormwater credit parks for regional recreation, social equity, and resilience in Florida. So this is a project that's been happening in the Florida Panhandle, who are still kind of recovering from Hurricane Michael, which hit the region in October 2018. So there have been some cities in the Apalachicola watershed, as well as the St. Andrew and St. Joseph's Bay estuaries, that have been working together to connect their downtown economic development with regional greenway and blueway trail opportunities. And so EPA has been participating to kind of support the vision of these communities and help diversify the region's economy. So they're looking to leverage the region's natural resources with economic diversification opportunities and build a regional recreation economy. So this project is exploring kind of innovative ways to support infrastructure for new parks, new camping sites, and trail connectivity through private investment partnerships. And essentially, this project is identifying areas where parks could be established through mitigation banking or credits, with the focus on resilience, carbon, conservation, and stormwater. So they're looking for areas where you're getting conservation priority, ecosystem services, advancing equitable park access, building onto existing trail networks. So it's kind of an interesting look at different ways to finance projects that have all of these co-benefits and help improve resilience in an area that's been really hard hit. So definitely tune in if you're interested in that. And then lastly, we wanted to give a quick update on progress toward developing Southeast Blueprint 2022. So Rua, I will look to you for this.
Yeah, so we're very close to releasing the new version of the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. This is the first one where at least all the states that you can see here, we've got consistent methods and approaches. We're still adding in some things from other plans for the Florida Marine and Puerto Rico as well. But we're super excited about getting this out. It should be, well, we'll have it out by next month with all the data and documentation and code behind indicators and all that fun stuff. So super excited about that. And we've got some really cool viewers things, which we'll talk about in the future, that'll let you easily access the information and use it in all kinds of different ways. So we're super excited about that. We did end up using the flood frequency stuff Yvonne talked about in a tiny way this year in the blueprint, but it was more to deal with misclassifications in our fire frequency indicator. But as you can tell, just from some of the discussions on the call, we're already exploring potential use in another way related to sort of floodplain restoration and things like that as well for future versions. But yeah, it's close. It's very close. The spatial data, at least that Hillary is showing you, is final. So if anyone's like, oh my God, I can't wait till October and I have a really important blueprint use that can't wait, just get in contact with Hillary. We'd be glad to help you out with that. But otherwise, all the fun, tasty stuff will be out and publicly available next month. Is that for anything?
No, that's great. Anybody else? Blueprint staff on the line? Did we forget anything? Awesome. Well, then I always like to end on this slide, how to get more involved in the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. If you're interested, I definitely encourage you to sign up for the SECAS newsletter. You can do that on the footer of any page at the SECAS website, secassoutheast.org. Obviously, please connect with your staff. There's short bios of everybody on our staff page. You can see who's participating in SECAS governance on the partners page. Please explore the blueprint. Current version 2021 is still up and available. And as Rua said, we're happy to help you use the new one even before the public release. If you just reach out to any of us, we'd be happy to help. So that's it from us. I will pause again for questions and just see if anybody has something they wanted to ask Yvonne or Rua or me before we hang up. All right, well, thank you so much again, Yvonne, for that great presentation. That clearly spurred some fabulous discussion, and appreciate you all tuning in. We hope you'll see you in October. Have a great rest of your week.
Great talk, Yvonne. See y'all later.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.